Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating paradox of Saudi Arabia, taking a close look at exactly how a land of divided desert tribes transformed into a global economic powerhouse. It's really a story of vast wealth, deeply rooted religion, and a constant high-stakes negotiation with modernity. Right at the very heart of this nation is a pretty massive fundamental tension. Think about the historical reality of the Arabian Peninsula for a second. A largely barren, desolate landscape inhabited by divided Bedouin tribes. Now, contrast that with the modern kingdom we see today, which is unified, incredibly wealthy, and deeply integrated into the global economy. The entire story of Saudi Arabia is basically a delicate, ongoing balancing act between those ultra-conservative historical traditions and a phase of really rapid, highly globalized modernization. Okay, let's map out our journey for This Explainer across 6 chapters. First up, the birth of the kingdom. Then, the discovery of oil, followed by religion, power and politics, social change and modernization, navigating global foreign relations, and finally, Vision 2030 and beyond. Chapter 1, the birth of the kingdom. From desert tribes to a unified state. So the foundation of the state certainly didn't happen overnight. It was forged through a really long, turbulent chronological arc that established a crucial alliance. It actually started way back in 1744 with the first Saudi state, cementing a pact between the Al Saud family and strict Wahhabi clerics. After collapsing and then rising again as a second state in 1824, the whole thing culminated in 1932. That's when Abdulaziz Al Saud, after years of grueling military campaigns, officially united the regions of Hijaz and Najd into the sovereign nation we recognize today. To pull off this massive unification, Ibn Saud relied heavily on the Ikhwan. These were fierce, nomadic Bedouin warriors, driven by an intense Wahhabi religious fervor. And they were incredibly effective, sweeping across the peninsula and capturing the holy cities of Mecca and Medina in 1924. But here's the catch. They believed themselves to be so close to God that they began writing their own rules. They started viewing the new king's political pragmatism as a total compromise of faith. They eventually grew so unwieldy and rebellious that Ibn Saud literally had to turn his own forces against them, crushing the rebellion in 1927, just to maintain control of his new nation. Chapter 2, the discovery of oil, the ultimate catalyst. Now, what happens when a deeply traditional, largely impoverished society suddenly strikes the ultimate geological lottery? Well, everything changed on March 2nd, 1938. American geologists had been out there exploring the unmapped deserts, and at a depth of exactly 4,240 feet, drillers hit immense commercial quantities of oil in a well they christened Dammam No. 7. That single discovery sparked a dizzying transformation, and the true scale of that wealth was really solidified later by the discovery of Ghawar. Just to give you a sense of scale here, Ghawar is the largest oil field on Earth, spanning 250 miles long and 27 miles wide. It's massive. It funneled absolutely unimaginable wealth into the kingdom, transforming dirt roads into superhighways and handing the state immense centralized economic power almost overnight. Chapter 3, Religion, Power, and Politics, the 3 pillars. So, how exactly do you govern a nation that is both phenomenally wealthy and deeply traditional? Saudi Arabia operates as an absolute monarchy, and it's firmly controlled by 3 powerful institutions. First, you have the royal family, holding executive power. Second is the religious establishment, or the ulema, who historically oversaw the courts, the education system, and public morality. And third, the security police, maintaining strict internal order. These 3 pillars have to constantly negotiate the boundaries of power, tradition, and modernization to keep the entire state stable. A terrifying point of friction for these pillars occurred back in 1979 during the siege of the Mecca Grand Mosque. An armed group of extremists violently took over Islam's holiest site. Naturally, this event deeply shook the nation. To secure their rule and prove their religious legitimacy following this crisis, the royal family pivoted heavily back toward the strict religious authorities. They poured funds into conservative education and enforced a really austere public code that ended up defining Saudi society for decades. Chapter 4, Social Change and Modernization, the Internal Friction. The crucial takeaway here is that this sudden economic boom created some severe friction within the social fabric of the country. Consider this stark contrast. In the mid-1900s, Saudi Arabia had a staggering 94% illiteracy rate. Education was mostly limited to rote Quranic memorization in a few major hubs. But with the massive influx of oil money, the state funded a sprawling, modern educational infrastructure pretty much from scratch. We're talking universities, hospitals, and modern cities, all while still trying to keep traditional religious subjects central to the curriculum. As society modernized, women's rights quickly became a highly visible battleground. Let's look at a dramatic moment in 1990, when 47 women bravely drove cars in the capital, Riyadh, to protest the strict ban on female drivers. The authorities responded swiftly, arresting them and confiscating their passports. But, it set a precedent. Decades of internal and external pressure built upon this exact moment, leading to the eventual historic lifting of the driving ban. Despite the ongoing push for reform, there's still a massive demographic imbalance in this modernizing economy. To put this in perspective, Saudi women make up 48% of the national population, but historically, they've held only 1 in 31 government positions. That's a huge gap the state is now highly pressured to address if it actually wants to unleash the full economic potential of its citizens. Chapter 5, Navigating Global Foreign Relations, the Geopolitical Tightrope. This internal balancing act heavily influenced how Saudi Arabia projected itself globally, particularly during the Cold War. Driven by regional threats, Riyadh struck a foundational bargain with the United States. It's often referred to as the Grand Pact. The terms were straightforward, but monumentally consequential. Saudi Arabia would ensure reliable access to petroleum for the West, and in exchange, the United States provided robust military and security guarantees to protect the kingdom. And this alliance has somehow survived massive geopolitical earthquakes. The 1967 Six-Day Wars shifted the entire balance of power in the Middle East. Then came the shock of the 1973 Arab oil embargo, which saw crude prices quadruple in a matter of months, making Saudi Arabia vastly richer but absolutely terrifying the West. And of course, there was the severe strain following the tragic 9/11 attacks in 2001, where the revelation that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals forced a deep, really uncomfortable reckoning in the relationship. Yet through all of this, the core security and economic partnership remained intact. Which brings us to arguably the most pressing, existential question facing the kingdom's leadership today in a rapidly shifting world. Can a nation survive indefinitely on a single commodity? Chapter 6, Vision 2030 and Beyond, the race to diversify. An astonishing 90% of the country's export revenues come directly from oil. 90%! Because of this, the entire economy is incredibly vulnerable to global price drops or the global shift toward renewable energy. When the price of oil falls, the state budget shrinks, directly threatening the generous welfare and tax-free benefits the population has totally come to expect. To survive, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman spearheaded Vision 2030. This is an aggressive master plan aiming to radically restructure the state. And the core goals are staggering in their ambition. They want to drastically reduce dependence on fossil fuels, shrink the bloated public sector to below 20% of GDP, tackle youth unemployment, foster a booming private enterprise ecosystem, and modernize long-standing cultural restrictions to attract global investment and talent. Basically, the whole shebang. But a major hurdle to this grand plan is the massive youth demographic in the country. With a current labor participation rate of only 41%, the state simply can no longer afford to just hire everyone into comfortable government jobs. Integrating young Saudis, both men and women, into a competitive, modernized private sector is absolutely critical to preventing economic stagnation. So we'll leave you with this final thought to take away from this explainer. Can Saudi Arabia successfully balance its deep-rooted Wahhabi heritage with its futuristic, post-oil ambitions? As the kingdom races toward 2030, its ultimate test is whether it can navigate the intense friction of its highly traditional past to secure its survival in a vastly different future. Thanks so much for joining us as we unpacked this complex and captivating story.